When we think about the great rulers of ancient India, we usually picture emperors and kings. But what if I told you that one of the most powerful kingdoms was actually ruled by a woman for 2 whole decades? Her name was Prabhavati Gupta, and for centuries, her incredible story was almost completely erased from history. So today, let's go on a journey to uncover it. So that's the big question, right? How did a woman in a deeply patriarchal world not only get the reins of power, but actually command an entire kingdom? Well, the answer isn't simple. It's this amazing story woven together from some really shrewd politics, a sudden tragedy, and just an undeniable force of will. All right, to understand this, we've got to go back in time to the late 4th century. This was an age of massive empires, and believe it or not, one of the most powerful weapons in a king's arsenal wasn't an army. It was a strategic wedding. And Prabhavati, she was born right into the center of this high-stakes political game. So here's the lay of the land at the time. You had the mighty Gupta Empire in the north, ruled by Prabhavati's father, the Emperor Chandragupta II, and to his south was the Vakataka kingdom. To make sure his southern border was safe, he arranged for Prabhavati to marry their king, Rudrasena II. Let's be clear, this wasn't about romance. It was a brilliant geopolitical move to lock down power across the subcontinent. And you have to understand, Prabhavati wasn't just any princess. Her power came from an absolutely impeccable royal pedigree. Her dad was one of India's most legendary emperors, Chandragupta II, a guy so famous he was known as Vikramaditya. Her mom was also royalty, a Naga princess. This lineage wasn't just a fancy title. It was her political capital. It gave her serious legitimacy. So, this strategic plan was all set. A peaceful alliance, a secure border, everything looked perfect. But you know how history is. It loves a plot twist. A sudden tragedy was about to completely shatter the political landscape and push Prabhavati into a role that absolutely no one could have seen coming. Her path to power was just incredibly swift and unexpected. Around the 380s, she marries Rudrasena, as planned. But then, only a few years later, around 390, he dies. Just suddenly. Her sons, the heirs to the throne, were just little boys, way too young to rule. This created a massive power vacuum, and who was there to fill it? Prabhavati Gupta. She stepped in as regent, which means she would rule in their place until they were old enough. And we're not talking about a brief, temporary arrangement here. For 20 years, Prabhavati Gupta was the de facto ruler of the Vakataka kingdom. 20 years. Let that sink in for a moment. That is a significant reign for any monarch, let alone a female regent in ancient India. This was a long, substantial period of female power. Okay, so you might be wondering, how on earth do we know all of this? How do we piece together the story of a queen from over 1600 years ago? Well, the proof isn't in some crumbling old manuscript. It's etched into something far more permanent: copper plates that have somehow survived all these centuries. These things, the Pune copper plates and others like them, are our main clues. And they aren't just dusty museum artifacts. You have to think of them as official government documents. They are legal decrees that give us a direct window into her reign. It's almost like we get to hear her own voice, asserting her authority across time. And what these plates tell us is just incredible. First off, she issued land grants under her own name. That's a huge deal. That's what kings and sovereign rulers do. She also openly used her father's powerful Gupta royal titles, basically flexing her imperial connections. She even promoted her personal faith, Vaishnavism, in a kingdom that was traditionally Shaivite. And, maybe most telling of all, in these official documents, she identified with her family's lineage, not her husband's. Now, that last point is so revealing. In Hindu tradition, when a woman got married, she would normally adopt her husband's gotra, his clan name. It symbolized that she was now part of his family. But Prabhavati, in her official records, used her father's gotra. This was a radical statement, a major power move. She was publicly declaring that her authority didn't come from her husband's family. It came directly from her own bloodline, the mighty Gupta dynasty. So, when you put all the pieces together, you get this remarkable picture of female power. As this quote says, she represents a rare but significant instance of female political authority. Basically, her prestigious family gave her the right, the political crisis gave her the opportunity, and her own actions, carving her power into copper, made it a reality for everyone to see. So we've established she was an incredibly powerful and effective ruler. But So what? Why does her story really matter today? What can this forgotten queen teach us about ancient India? Well, it turns out her impact is way bigger than you might think. Her legacy is huge. For gender history, she completely shatters the myth that women had no public political role in India's so-called golden age. For statecraft, her life is a masterclass in using marriage for geopolitical stability. Administratively, her land grants show us exactly how rulers extended their influence. And maybe most importantly, her 20-year reign acted as a cultural bridge, spreading the advanced culture and administration of the Guptas deep into central India. She wasn't just a placeholder, she was a genuine agent of change. And that just leaves us with this one final, lingering question. Prabhawati Gupta's story was pieced together from inscriptions carved into metal plates that almost didn't survive. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other powerful women, how many other lost queens are out there? Their stories just sitting in the archives, waiting for someone to find them. When we look back at medieval Indian history, it's filled with these epic tales of kings and their conquests. But sometimes, the most incredible stories get overlooked. And that's definitely the case for a queen who held absolute power for nearly half a century. Her name was Dida, and she didn't just rule Kashmir, she dominated it with a will of pure iron. So let's get into her story. Right off the bat, we're hit with this central paradox of her life. Here's a ruler who was defined by a physical disability, and yet, at the same time, had this absolutely unshakable grip on power. So how on earth did a woman facing those kinds of challenges rise up to become one of the most powerful monarchs of her time? Well, that's exactly the question we're going to dig into. To really get a handle on Dida, we first have to understand her reputation. And believe me, it's complex, it's sharp, and over the centuries, it's earned her some seriously powerful titles. Her whole legacy is kind of captured in these two epic nicknames. On one hand, people call her the Catherine of Kashmir, like Catherine the Great, which points to her long, stable, but yeah, pretty ruthless reign. But on the other hand, she's just the Iron Queen. And that name tells you everything you need to know about how she dealt with the chaos threatening her kingdom. Her journey to the throne was anything but a straight line. Seriously, it was a masterclass in political maneuvering, making the right alliances, and just sheer unstoppable force of will. Let's take a look at how she pulled it off. So, her story really kicks off with a brilliant strategic marriage back in 950 CE, which united two powerful kingdoms. But Dida was never going to be some passive queen consort. No way. She immediately became a co-ruler in everything but name. So influential that her name was right there on the kingdom's coins alongside her husband's. And then, in 958 CE, the whole game changed. Her husband's death wasn't the end of her career. It was the launching pad for her real rise to power as regent. And this contrast it's at the very heart of her early life. While the history books mention her physical disability, even giving her the nickname Charanhina, which means footless, the political reality tells a completely different story. I mean, you can't argue with hard evidence like coins, and they showed Dick Shema. Their names literally fused together. This wasn't a woman hiding in the shadows. She was a partner in power from day one. The next 22 years, wow, they would be a brutal, relentless test of survival. The kingdom she was now in charge of was notoriously unstable, totally weakened by decades of infighting. As regent, she wasn't just keeping the throne warm, she was fighting for her life and the very survival of the kingdom itself. After her husband died, the expectation was clear. She was supposed to perform sati, the ritual of self-immolation, but she refused, and this was her first massive act of defiance. Instead of choosing a so-called noble death, she chose power. She chose survival. She chose to rule. Her time as regent was just this non-stop series of crises. I mean, first she ruled for her son until he tragically died. Then she carried on for her grandsons, who also died young. And all the while, rivals were constantly popping up, sensing weakness. But they were so mistaken. Dida didn't respond with grief or despair. She responded with methodical, ruthless precision, taking out every single person who dared to challenge her. So after more than 2 decades of ruling through other people and surviving countless plots against her, Dida basically decided, you know what, I'm done with this. No more regency, no more proxies. It was time for her to rule absolutely. Now, to really appreciate what she accomplished, you have to understand her enemies. The Damras weren't just any old rebels. They were this powerful class of feudal lords who actually thrived on chaos. For them, a weak king meant more power and more money. For Dida to rule, she had to break their endless cycle of destabilization for good. And her approach to power? It was brutally effective. You could say it was Machiavellian before Machiavelli was even a thing. She had a two-pronged strategy. First, gold. She used it to buy loyalty and neutralize threats. But for anyone who couldn't be bought, her solution was swift, it was decisive, and it was final. Cold-blooded execution. And so, in the year 980 CE, she finally made it official. Dida took the throne not as a regent, but as the sole sovereign ruler of Kashmir. This was an almost unheard-of achievement for a woman in medieval India, and it really marks the absolute climax of her incredible journey. So what did she do with all this absolute power? Well, her reign wasn't just about survival and grabbing control. It was also about building a legacy that would literally reshape Kashmir for generations to come. While everyone remembers her for her ruthlessness, she was also a prolific builder. And make no mistake, this wasn't just about being charitable. Founding towns, building temples, and commissioning monasteries, these were all calculated acts of statecraft. It was her way of cementing her authority, winning over the public, and literally building her legacy into the very landscape she fought so hard to control. So if you had to boil her entire impact down to a single number, it would be this: 50. For nearly half a century, as a consort, as a regent, and finally as a monarch, Dida was the single most dominant force in Kashmiri politics. In an age of total instability, she provided something extraordinary: decades of continuous, stable rule. And her political genius didn't just end with her. Her final act was a masterstroke of succession planning. You see, violent power struggles had plagued Kashmir for generations, but by carefully choosing her nephew, she broke that cycle. She ensured a smooth transition of power and founded the brand new Lohara dynasty. She secured her legacy by securing Kashmir's future. Okay, so why are we talking about a queen from the 10th century today? It's because her story is just packed with these timeless themes of power, leadership, and totally defying expectations. This quote pretty much nails her modern relevance. Her story is just this incredible example of how a leader's skill, their intelligence, and their sheer force of will can overcome huge barriers like gender norms and physical challenges to forge order out of complete chaos. At the end of the day, her life is a vital case study that forces us to ask some really big questions about power. I mean, she smashed the patriarchal ceiling of her time, she showed the world what female political agency could look like, and she proved that strong, centralized leadership could be the key to a state's very survival. What's really fascinating is that even the primary historian who wrote about her life, Kahana, was totally conflicted. He wrote down all of her cruelty and her scandals, but he just couldn't deny her incredible political skill. He was forced to admire her statesman-like instinct, basically admitting that, yeah, despite her methods, she was an undeniably effective ruler. Which brings us right to the final question, doesn't it? Was she a pragmatic ruler who did what she had to do to save her kingdom from collapsing into anarchy, or was she a ruthless tyrant who crushed anyone and everyone in her path? The truth, as it so often is with the most compelling figures in history, is probably somewhere in the middle. And that, right there, is what makes the legacy of the Iron Queen so powerful and so enduring.
You know, history is just packed with these incredible stories, right? Pivotal moments, and honestly, forgotten heroes whose actions literally shaped the world, but whose names we just might not know. Well, today, we're going to dive deep into one of those exact stories.
So, when you think about the Ghorid invasions of India, your mind probably jumps straight to the battles of Terrain. You know, the huge clash between Muhammad Ghori and Prithviraj Chauhan. And that makes sense. Those were absolutely defining moments. But what if I told you that's not the whole picture? Not even close. What if I told you that 13 years before all of that, Ghori had already tried to invade and was handed a defeat so crushing it changed everything?
So the big question is, who was it? Who really stopped one of the most feared invaders of the era dead in his tracks? Well, it wasn't some powerful king on a famous throne. It was someone history has for way too long just kinda overlooked.
To get the answer, we have to go back to the 12th century to the kingdom of Gujarat. This is where a queen was forced to defend her home against what seemed like impossible odds.
Okay, let me introduce you to Queen Nike Devi. She's from the Chalukya dynasty, the family running Gujarat at the time. Now, after her husband, King Ajay Apala, died, the throne passed to their son, Mulla Raja II. The thing is, he was just a kid. So Nike Devi steps up. She becomes the regent queen, which means she's the one ruling, the one protecting the entire kingdom on his behalf. I mean, think about that pressure. She's now the guardian of a dynasty, a people, and a child king.
And right as she takes on this massive responsibility, a storm starts brewing in the northwest. Muhammad Ghori, fresh off capturing Multan, turns his gaze toward the legendary wealth of Gujarat. And in his mind, the path to conquest looked wide open.
Ghori's mistake here was, well, it was huge. He saw a kingdom led by a widow and a boy and just assumed it was an easy target ripe for the picking. But he wasn't marching on a vulnerable kingdom. No way. He was marching straight toward a brilliant military strategist who had already rallied powerful allies and, crucially, knew her homeland like the back of her hand. And that underestimation? It was going to cost him. Big time. The stage was now set for a battle that would become a masterclass in strategy, fought on terrain handpicked by the queen herself. All right, so the year is 1178 CE. Muhammad Ghori's massive army marches into Gujarat, fully expecting a quick and easy win. What he found instead was Nike Devi's army waiting for him at a place that would go down in history, the Battle of Kasaharda.
Her plan was just genius. Seriously. Instead of trying to fight Ghori's powerful cavalry out on the open plains where they'd have the advantage, she did the opposite. She lured his army into the narrow, rugged mountain passes near Mount Abu. This one brilliant move completely canceled out his biggest strength. The hills and gorges broke his army's formations, and get this, historical accounts say Nike Devi herself led the charge, with her young son literally strapped to her. Can you imagine the sight? It inspired her soldiers to fight with unbelievable ferocity.
The result was an absolute disaster for the invaders. The Ghorid army was completely routed. It was a crushing, humiliating defeat. So total, in fact, that Muhammad Ghori had to flee for his life, escaping with just a handful of his personal guards. And here's the kicker. This one battle secured Gujarat from any invasion coming from that direction for nearly 20 years. But the impact of this victory went so much further than just saving one kingdom. It actually reshaped the entire course of the Ghorid invasions and really the history of the whole subcontinent. Think about this ripple effect. After that humiliating defeat in 1178, Ghori never tried to invade India through Gujarat again. That door was slammed shut. He was forced to completely rethink his entire strategy, shifting his focus north, toward the Khyber Pass. And that is the strategic change that led him, 13 years later, right into conflict with Prithviraj Chauhan at Terrain. So, Nike Devi's victory directly set the stage for one of India's most legendary showdowns. And look, this isn't just a local legend or folklore. This is solid, corroborated history. Of course, Indian texts from the time give these detailed, amazing accounts of the victory. But what's really compelling is that even Persian chronicles, from Ghori's own side, admit that the army was defeated. You know it's the real deal when even your opponent's historians have to write down that you won. So let's just quickly recap why this one battle is so important to remember. First, it completely shatters the myth that Indian kingdoms were just easily conquered. Second, it's a perfect showcase of how effective strategic alliances could be. But maybe most importantly, it's one of history's clearest and most powerful examples of female leadership in the heat of battle, and it undeniably changed the entire map of future invasions into India. There's this quote that just sums it all up perfectly. Her victory wasn't just a defensive win, right? It was this powerful statement, a statement of resistance, of brilliant strategy, and incredible strength, all achieved under the leadership of a regent queen defending her son's kingdom. It really leaves you with a fascinating question, doesn't it? Nike Devi's story was there the whole time, a critical chapter we almost missed. It just makes you wonder, how many other game-changing moments and how many other incredible heroes are just waiting there in the pages of history for us to find them?
Today we're diving into the incredible story of Razia Sultana, the first and only woman to ever rule the Delhi Sultanate. It is a story packed with brilliant strategy, some seriously radical defiance, and ultimately a tragic downfall that tells us something really important about how power works. I mean, at its core, Razia's entire life revolves around this one question. What happens when the best person for the job is the one person nobody wants to see get it? By all accounts, she was the sharpest, most competent heir to the throne, but she had one giant obstacle. She was a woman in a world run by men, and that single fact was going to define everything.
And get this, while her reign was absolutely groundbreaking, it lasted just 4 years. So you have to ask, why was the rule of such a capable monarch cut so dramatically short? Well, the answer is in how she got the throne, how she decided to rule, and of course, the powerful enemies she made along the way. Okay, so her journey to the throne actually begins not with her, but with a pretty radical decision from her father, the Sultan Iltutmish. He saw something special in his daughter that he just wasn't seeing in his sons.
And listen, her father did not mince words. His reasoning was blunt and totally broke with tradition. He named his daughter as his successor for one simple reason. He knew she was competent, and he knew his sons, well, they just weren't cut out to rule.
But you know, a father's will, even a sultan's, isn't always enough. After Iltutmish died, the powerful Turkish nobles basically just ignored his wishes. And this is where we see Razia's own political genius really shine. She didn't just wait for the throne, she went out and took it.
I mean, this was a masterclass in political strategy. The nobles put her useless brother on the throne, right? So what does Razia do? She doesn't back down. No way. She puts on the red robes of justice, a symbol that she's seeking help, and she goes straight to the people during Friday prayers. And it worked. The public and the army rose up, kicked her brother out, and put Razia right where she was supposed to be. Now, Razia had zero intention of being some symbolic queen hiding behind a curtain. She was there to rule, and she made that crystal clear from day one. It started with something as simple as her title. She refused to be called Sultana. Why? Because that just meant wife of the Sultan. She insisted on Sultan, the sovereign ruler. It was this huge declaration that she, and she alone, was in charge. And she didn't stop there. She backed up that title with actions that were just unheard of. She completely abandoned the veil, started wearing the tunic and headdress of a male ruler, and held her court out in public for everyone to see. This wasn't just for show. She personally led armies into battle. And maybe most importantly, she started promoting non-Turkish nobles, which was a direct challenge to the guys who thought they ran the show. So, as you can imagine, a strong, independent monarch who made her own decisions was the absolute last thing the powerful Turkish nobility wanted. Her revolutionary style was a direct threat to them, and it didn't take long for conspiracies and rebellion to start brewing.
And here are the main antagonists of our story, a group called the Turkana İçhalgani, or the 40. Think of them as this elite club of Turkish nobles who were used to pulling the strings from behind the scenes. They didn't want a strong ruler, they wanted a puppet, and Razia was nobody's puppet.
So the whole conflict of her reign really boils down to this. You had Razia, who was fighting to make the monarchy strong and centralize power. And then you had the nobles, who wanted to keep all the power for themselves and control the throne. A clash between these two was pretty much inevitable.
And that simmering conflict? Well, it finally boiled over into an all-out revolt, setting off a chain of events that was swift, brutal, and brought her entire reign to a really tragic end.
It all just came crashing down in a single year, 1240. A rebellion kicks off, led by one of her governors. In the fight, Razia's trusted advisor is killed, and she's taken prisoner. But even then, she makes one last incredibly bold move. She marries the guy who captured her, turning an enemy into an ally to try and take back the throne. It was a brilliant gamble, but it just wasn't enough. Their combined army was defeated, and Razia was killed soon after.
So her reign was over, just like that. 4 years. But even though it was short, her time as Sultan left this huge mark on history, and it tells us a profound story about power, prejudice, and what it really means to be qualified.
You know, maybe the most telling assessment comes from a historian who was actually alive during her time. He wrote that she had all the qualities and qualifications necessary to be a great king. Her only defect, in his eyes, was that she was a woman. And that right there is the crucial takeaway from her story. Razia Sultana's reign proves that power, back then, wasn't just about being the best person for the job. It was about getting the powerful elites to agree and, of course, fitting into the rigid social rules of the time. Her incredible skill just couldn't overcome a system that was not ready for a woman to be king.
Okay, picture this. It's the 13th century in medieval India, and one of the most celebrated and successful rulers is King Rudadeva Maharaja. A brilliant military leader, a loved administrator, a total powerhouse. But this king was hiding a secret. a secret that could have shattered the entire kingdom. The king was actually a queen. So, how in the world did she pull off one of the greatest political feats in history? Let's get into it. I mean, that's really the core question of her entire life, isn't it? In an era where power was exclusively, and I mean exclusively male, how did a woman not only get the throne, but hold on to it, expand her kingdom, and create a golden age? Well, the answer is a straight-up masterclass in political genius. So, her story really kicks off with this completely radical decision by her father, King Ganapati Deva. Now, he was a great ruler, but he had a big problem: no sons. And back then, that was basically a death sentence for a dynasty. But Ganapati Deva wasn't about to let his legacy crumble. He had a wild plan, one that involved an ancient ritual that was as brilliant as it was controversial. So, how did he do it? He used something called the Patrika ceremony. And you have to understand, this wasn't just some symbolic gesture. Nope. This was a formal legal transformation. Through this Vedic ritual, Rudrama Devi was officially, on paper and in practice, designated as his son. This gave her the full, unquestionable rights of a male heir. It was an absolutely brilliant political move to make her claim legit. And she didn't just accept this new role, she owned it. She was crowned with the male name Rudradeva Maharaja, she dressed as a man, and she even led her armies from the front lines. This is so important because it meant she wasn't just a regent, keeping the throne warm for a husband or a future son. No way. She was ruling in her own right. She was the king. But okay, even with her dad's genius plan, taking the throne is one thing. Actually holding on to it, that's a whole different story. The second she was crowned, you can bet the knives came out. She was just surrounded by threats. From the inside, you had these powerful feudal lords, guys whose entire authority came from their family name, and they were not about to be ruled by a woman, so they started plotting rebellions. And from the outside, oh yeah, neighboring kingdoms saw a woman on the throne and thought, weakness, this is our chance to invade. She had to prove she was strong, and she had to do it fast. And this, right here, is where her true genius just shines through. She was facing a system that was literally designed to reject her. So what did she do? She didn't just try to survive in it. She remade the system itself. She forged a whole new kind of power. Her key strategy was to completely remake the power structure. On one side, you had the old guard, these hereditary lords who got their power from birthright, which made them super unreliable and often disloyal. So she just bypassed them. She created a whole new class of commanders, the Nayamkaras. Their power didn't come from their family. It came directly from her based on their skill and loyalty. This was a masterstroke. It created a new power base that was completely devoted to her. So while she's securing her political power, she's also securing her kingdom physically. She finishes building the massive Warangal fort, which was like a fortress inside a fortress. She added a second outer wall and then dug this gigantic moat around it. She was sending a very, very clear message to all her enemies. This kingdom is not up for grabs. With her political power cemented and her military defenses rock solid, Rudrama Devi didn't just survive. She absolutely thrived. Her reign kicked off a period of stability, military victory, and just incredible prosperity for her kingdom. And the victories just kept piling up. She personally led her armies to crush the invading Yadavas from the north, forcing them to pay a huge sum of money. Then she turned around and defended her southern borders from the powerful Pandya and Chola empires. And most importantly, she systematically shut down every single internal rebellion, cementing her authority and proving to everyone once and for all that she was the one in charge. And her success was so incredible that it didn't go unnoticed. Word of this powerful queen ruling as a king in India started to spread, and it reached the ears of one of the most famous travelers in all of history. Yep, that's right, Marco Polo. The Venetian explorer actually visited her kingdom toward the end of her reign, and he was completely blown away. He wrote that she was a lover of justice and peace and, this is the best part, that she was more beloved by her people than any king or lord who came before her. I mean, coming from a world traveler like Polo, that is an incredible testament to how good a ruler she really was. Marco Polo also noted the incredible length of her reign, over 40 years. You have to understand, in the turbulent medieval world where dynasties could rise and fall in less than a decade, ruling for 4 of them was a monumental achievement, especially for someone who started with every single odds stacked against her. And all that stability? It paid off. Big time. Marco Polo was amazed by the port of Matupali, which had become this bustling hub for international trade. Under her rule, the kingdom was exporting luxury goods like the finest cloth, diamonds, and spices all across the known world. But that wealth didn't just sit in the treasury. Rudramadevi was a great ruler, so she reinvested it right back into her kingdom. She became a huge builder and a patron of the arts, leaving behind a legacy literally carved in stone that we can still see today. Her reign saw this explosion of magnificent architecture. The most famous example is the Ramappa Temple. It's such a masterpiece of art that today it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. She also funded schools and continued her family's tradition of building these huge irrigation tanks, which were the lifeblood of the farms. She built an empire that wasn't just strong and wealthy, but also incredibly cultured. So, we've covered the what and the how, but that leaves the biggest question, right? Why are we talking about a 13th century queen who ruled as a king? What's the real takeaway from her incredible life? Ultimately, Rudramadevi's story is this timeless lesson in power and ingenuity. She proved that when you're faced with a system designed to exclude you, maybe the best path isn't to fight it head-on, but to cleverly and brilliantly reshape it from the inside. Her reign shows us that leadership isn't about gender. It's about vision, courage, and the will to build something new.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into the absolutely incredible story of a 16th century ruler whose legacy of courage still echoes to this day. We're talking, of course, about the warrior queen, Rani Durgavati of Gondwana. And let's just start with the powerful words that really defined her life and her final stand. This single sentence, it captures everything about the spirit of a queen who chose honor above all else. I mean, this was the principle that guided her entire reign. So to really get who she was as a warrior, you have to understand her journey to the throne. And here's the thing, it wasn't a path she was just born into. Nope, this was a path she forged through smart alliances, through tragedy, and frankly, through sheer force of will.
So her life was really marked by these key moments you're looking at right now. She was born in 1524, a princess of the Chandela Rajputs, and if that name rings a bell, it should. We're talking about a famous warrior clan, the ones behind the stunning temples at Khajuraho. Then, in 1542, she marries into the Gons dynasty. Now, this wasn't just any marriage, it was a brilliant strategic move. In the kind of fractured political world of 16th century India, this united 2 major powers. But then, just 8 years later, in 1550, tragedy strikes. Her husband dies, and suddenly, she's thrust onto the throne as regent.
Now, what's really interesting is that her time as regent wasn't just about, holding on to power. Not at all. It was about building a genuine golden age for her kingdom. She didn't just maintain the status quo, she totally transformed Gondwana.
And get this, her son was just 5 years old. 5! A king in name only, right? Rani Durgavati was the one truly in charge, and she immediately proved how skilled she was. She wasn't some placeholder keeping the seat warm. No way. She launched this ambitious program of public works. She strengthened her army, and she became a huge patron of the arts. Her reign was all about progress, not just survival.
And this next part just brilliantly illustrates how successful she was. But you might be wondering, where did all this wealth come from? Well, Gondwana was super rich in natural resources, especially forests just teeming with elephants. And her savvy policies opened up these really robust trade routes. It was that combo, natural wealth and smart governance, that led her rival's historian Abul Fazl to write that people paid their taxes in gold coins and elephants. I mean, can you imagine? That is an incredible testament to her economic leadership. She was a builder, a unifier. This table gives you a quick snapshot of her impact. But these aren't just bullet points on a chart. The massive reservoirs she built, like Ranital, these were engineering marvels that completely revolutionized farming in the region. The forts she put up, especially the new capital at Charagargar, they secured her kingdom's borders. Everything she did was strategic. It was all designed to build a strong, prosperous, and secure state. But you know how these things go? All that prosperity, it attracted some very unwanted attention. Word of her kingdom's immense wealth reached the ears of the Mughal emperor, Akbar. And this led to the greatest challenge of her life, and the very event that would cement her legend forever.
And look, this wasn't just any invasion. On one side, you have Rani Durgavati leading this fiercely independent regional force. And on the other, General Asaf Khan, representing the mighty Mughal Empire under Emperor Akbar. We're talking about an empire that was fast becoming one of the wealthiest and most powerful on the planet, with a massive, modern army. It really was a classic David versus Goliath showdown, a queen defending her homeland against a superpower hell-bent on expansion.
Okay, let's get to the climax of this whole story. This is where Rani Durgavati really cemented her legend, not as a diplomat or an administrator, but as a warrior, right there on the battlefield.
Facing absolutely impossible odds, she used brilliant tactics. Look at step 1. She chose her ground perfectly. She lured the huge Mughal army into this narrow, hilly pass of Narai, which completely canceled out their advantage in numbers. So smart. Then, as you see in step 2, she personally led the charge from atop her war elephant, Sarman. She fought with such ferocity that she reportedly drove the Mughals back 3 times. Even after getting hit by 2 arrows, grievously wounded, she refused to retreat and just kept on fighting until she was completely surrounded.
So, the crucial point here is her final act. Facing certain capture, she chose to live by her own code of honor and took her own life. That day, June 24th, 1564, became her day of martyrdom. But her story didn't just fade away. Oh no, it was woven into the very fabric of local identity through countless poems, songs, and folktales. Her sacrifice became this timeless symbol of defiance.
But her story doesn't end on the battlefield. Not even close. Her legacy is this powerful, enduring example of leadership, of integrity, and of resistance that honestly continues to resonate centuries later. So why does she still matter so much? Well, as you can see from these points, she really embodies a ton. She is this potent symbol of fighting for your home against an overwhelming empire. In a time dominated by male rulers, she stands out as this towering example of female leadership. For so many women in India today, she's an icon of strength and courage. And what's so critical is that her bravery was so undeniable that it was her enemy's own court historian who wrote it all down for us to remember.
And this right here is the key takeaway. It perfectly sums up why she's so important. It's that powerful combination, right? She was a brilliant administrator who created incredible prosperity and a courageous warrior who chose an honorable death over submission. That's what makes her legacy so compelling, so significant.
And hey, for those of you preparing for civil service exams, listen up. Her story is directly relevant. She is a perfect case study for a whole range of topics, from medieval history and women rulers to tribal sovereignty and regional resistance. So knowing her story isn't just interesting, it's absolutely essential.
So as we wrap this up, it kind of leaves us with a final thought to chew on. Rani Durgavati's kingdom. It did eventually fall to the Mughal Empire, but her legacy of courage, that has outlasted empires. It continues to inspire people centuries later, and it really makes you ask the question, what truly defines a legacy? Is it the empire you build or the stand you take?
All right, let's dive into the absolutely incredible story of one of medieval India's most formidable figures, the warrior queen Chand Bibi. Now, this sounds like something straight out of a legend, right? But it is real history. We're about to find out exactly how one woman managed to stand firm against what was, at the time, the most powerful empire in the world. You know, they didn't call her the Invincible Lady for nothing. Chand Bibi wasn't just some figurehead ruler. No, she was a brilliant regent, a seriously sharp diplomat, and get this, a hands-on warrior who went toe-to-toe with one of the greatest emperors in history, Akbar the Great. So what really sets her story apart? Well, her influence wasn't just stuck in one court. She was a queen of 2 kingdoms, which made her a major power player across the entire Deccan region. So how did she get this power? It all started with a really strategic royal marriage. She was born into the royal family of Ahmednagar, and then she married into the royalty of Bijapur. This wasn't about love, it was a critical diplomatic move. In fact, this alliance became the backbone of the confederacy that famously went on to defeat the super-powerful Vijayanagara Empire. And her leadership, wow, it was built on this incredible range of skills. First off, she was a polyglot, fluent in everything from Arabic and Persian to Marathi and Kannada. Imagine how that helped her unite a diverse army. But she wasn't just a diplomat. She was a military innovator, one of the first to use Moroccan guerrilla tactics. And on top of all that, she was a skilled musician and a painter. I mean, this combination of talents is what made her such an unbelievably effective leader. Her political journey is just so unique. First, she's the regent in Bijapur, the kingdom she married into. But then, in 1595, her home kingdom, Ahmednagar, is in crisis. So what does she do? She goes back and becomes its regent too. It is so rare in history to find a leader who managed to effectively govern two completely separate, powerful states. It's just wild. And all of this experience, it was all leading up to the defining moment of her life, her defiance against the Mughal Empire. This is where the legend of the invincible lady was really born. Okay, picture this. It's 1595. The Mughal war machine, and I mean the most powerful military force on the planet at the time, shows up at the gates of Ahmednagar. And who's leading the charge? Emperor Akbar's own son, Prince Murad. The odds, they were completely impossibly stacked against her. This is the moment that goes down in history. The Mughal cannons blast a hole right through the fort's walls. And who appears in the chaos? Chand Bibi herself, in full armor, sword in hand. She doesn't hide. She goes right to the gap, rallies her troops, and stays there all night, supervising the repairs. Can you just imagine the impact that had on her soldiers' morale? It must have been absolutely electric. And that incredible act of defiance? It completely turned the tide. By 1596, the whole situation had been flipped on its head. Her leadership was just so effective, her resistance so fierce, that the mighty Mughal army actually had to give up the siege and ask for peace. Think about that. She didn't just survive, she forced a global superpower to come to the negotiating table. That's a huge deal. But this is where the story takes a really tragic turn. Because as we see so often in history, the most dangerous enemy wasn't outside the walls. It was inside. So she's basically fighting a war on two fronts. You've got the massive Mughal army on the outside, sure, but inside it's a constant battle against her own court politics. Her court was just riddled with warring factions, conspiracies, and nobles who were always questioning her authority. Well, that peace treaty, it didn't last long. By 1599, the Mughals were back, and this time, it wasn't just a prince. Emperor Akbar came himself. The threat was now bigger than ever. Facing an absolutely impossible situation against the emperor himself, Chand Bibi did what she always did. She chose pragmatism. She advised negotiating a surrender to save the lives of her people. But her greatest strength, her diplomacy, was twisted by her rivals inside the court. They spread a rumor that she was a traitor, and that rumor spread like wildfire. A mob, led by one of her own commanders, stormed her rooms. The invincible queen, she wasn't defeated by the Mughals. She was killed by the very people she was trying so hard to protect. It's such a tragic end. But despite that, her impact was profound. It's echoed through the centuries. Her legacy is one of fierce, intelligent, and powerful resistance. And her legacy goes way beyond just defending one city. She's actually seen as a pioneer of what's called the Deccan identity, which was a pretty radical new concept for the time. The idea was simple but powerful, that the southern sultans, even with all their differences, had a common cause in uniting against the Mughal from the north. So her resistance didn't just save a fort, it helped create a whole new sense of regional pride that would shape politics for generations to come. So when you boil it all down, her leadership was this rare, perfect mix of military guts and smart, pragmatic diplomacy. That unique blend of skills is what made her so incredibly effective and allowed her to, at least for a while, stop the Mughal expansion in its tracks. And that's why her story is still such a vital case study in leadership and statecraft today. It also shines a huge light on the incredible and, let's be honest, often overlooked role that women played in shaping medieval history. She's proof that power and influence were never, ever just for men. And that really leaves us with one final thought. Chand Bibi's story was almost lost to time, just preserved in a few old chronicles. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other amazing leaders like her are out there? Their stories just waiting for us to find them. When you think of the Mughal Empire, you probably picture powerful emperors, grand courts, and epic battles. But what if I told you that for a time, the most powerful person in that empire wasn't the emperor at all, but his wife? Her name was Noor Jahan, and this is the incredible story of the real power behind the throne. So that's the big question we're tackling here. How did one woman, in an age completely dominated by men, manage to become the actual, effective ruler of one of the most powerful empires on Earth? Well, the answer is a total masterclass in politics, influence, and just sheer willpower. All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll get to know the woman herself. Then, we're going to break down her political masterpiece, something called the Noor Jahan Junta. We'll look at all the ways she showed off her power, explore her lasting impact on culture, and finally, really dig into why her story is still so important today. Okay, so our story kicks off with a woman named Mehrunnisa. She was the daughter of a Persian noble, and in 1611, she marries the Mughal emperor Jahangir. Now, he was apparently so completely blown away by her intelligence and her beauty that he gave her a new name, Noor Jahan, which means light of the world. And believe me, she was about to live up to that name and then some. But here's the thing about Noor Jahan. She was way more than just the emperor's favorite wife. She was a political genius. She knew that to have any real lasting power, she needed a totally loyal crew. So she went ahead and built what historians now call the Noor Jahan Junta. So what exactly was this junta? Well, think of it as her personal political machine, a super tight-knit group that she put in charge of all the top jobs in the government. For about 15 years, basically from the day she got married until the emperor died, this group made Noor Jahan the undisputed center of power. And this is where her brilliance really comes through. This wasn't just some alliance of convenience. No, this was a family business. You had Noor Jahan as the mastermind, of course. Then she puts her own father and her brother in charge of key departments. And for a while, she even got the heir to the throne, Prince Khurram, on her team. In a court where nobody trusted anybody, this family setup gave her an absolute iron grip on the empire. But, in the high-stakes game of Mughal politics, nothing lasts forever. The whole thing started to crack in 1622. Noor Jahan made a huge power move. She decided to back her own son-in-law for the throne instead of Prince Khurram. That one decision just shattered the junta. It led to rebellions, civil war, and when Jahangir finally died in 1627, Shah Jahan took power, and Noor Jahan's reign was over. Just like that. But wow, for those 15 years, her power was absolute. And she was not shy about it. She started using symbols of power that were supposed to be for the emperor and the emperor alone. For a woman in the Mughal court, this was completely unheard of. Just get a load of this. This is an inscription from an actual coin. She is the only Mughal queen to ever have her name minted on the currency. And that title, Badshah Begum, that basically means female sovereign or lady king. It was a public declaration for the whole empire to see who was really in charge. And her power went so far beyond just coins. She was signing official royal decrees, called farmans, with her own name and seal. She would appear at the Jarocha Darshan, that's the imperial balcony where the emperor shows himself to the people. No woman had ever done that before. She was negotiating with foreign leaders, planning military campaigns, and, get this, she even personally led an army to rescue her husband when he was captured. She wasn't behind the throne, she was practically sitting on it. And just in case you thought her talents were purely political, think again. The emperor himself wrote in his memoirs about what an incredible marksman she was. She once took down 4 tigers with only 6 shots while riding on a moving elephant. In the Mughal world, that wasn't just a party trick. That was a public display of the courage and strength you'd expect from a ruler. So, Noor Jahan's legacy isn't just about political power. It's also about beauty and style. She was a true cultural force, and her amazing taste left a permanent mark on Mughal art, architecture, and even fashion. I mean, she was a total visionary. The tomb she built for her father is an absolute masterpiece. It was the very first Mughal building to be made entirely of white marble. And it features this amazing decorative technique called pietra dura, that intricate inlay of precious stones, which, would go on to be a huge inspiration for the Taj Mahal. On top of that, she designed public gardens, new styles of clothing, and even a super popular rose perfume. Her influence was everywhere. So what's the big takeaway here? Why does Noor Jahan still matter so much today? Well, her story is more than just a cool piece of history. It's a timeless lesson in power, politics, and how gender plays into all of it. To really appreciate how politically savvy she was, just compare her to another famous female ruler, Razia Sultana. Razia tried to take the throne by challenging the male nobility head-on, and, well, it didn't end well for her. They overthrew and killed her. Noor Jahan, on the other hand, played a much smarter game. She didn't try to break the system, she bent it to her will by ruling through her personally selected junta. Now, for centuries, historians have debated the source of her power. Some early accounts, which were often pretty hostile to female rulers, basically said she was only in charge because her husband was too busy with his addictions. But a more modern view suggests that Jahangir, seeing how incredibly talented she was, actually chose to share his power with her, creating this kind of unique co-rulership. And this quote right here, I think it just nails it. She institutionalized informal power. She took the influence she had behind the scenes and made it official, exercising all the power of a sovereign without ever actually wearing the crown. She literally wrote the playbook on how to rule from the shadows. And that brings us to our final question. Was Noor Jahan just a historical one-off, a total fluke? Or did she create a timeless blueprint for how to wield power from behind the scenes, a strategy that, let's be honest, probably still shapes our world in ways we don't even see? All right, today we are diving into the incredible story of Maharani Tarabai Bhonsle. She's a formidable, and I think often overlooked queen who stared down one of the world's most powerful empires and just refused to blink. Okay, let's just start with this because you really need to get this. This isn't some praise from a friendly writer. This is from Kafi Khan, a Mughal historian. You know, an enemy chronicler. He saw with his own eyes how this one woman completely shattered every expectation the mighty Mughal Empire had. A quote like this from the other side, it tells you right away we're dealing with someone absolutely extraordinary. And really, the story of Tarabai is a clash of titans. It's this epic showdown. On one side, you've got the old, incredibly determined and massively powerful Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb. And on the other, a young Maratha queen who was suddenly thrown into power with absolutely everything to lose. So, who was this woman? Well, leadership was literally in her blood. Her dad was the commander-in-chief of the Maratha army, and she married into the family of its founder, the legendary Shivaji. But here's the crucial part. She wasn't just some royal by marriage. No. She was trained from a young age as a warrior and a diplomat. And believe me, those skills were about to be tested to their absolute limit. But see, Tarabai didn't inherit some peaceful, stable kingdom. Not at all. She was thrown right into the fire during what was, without a doubt, the Maratha Empire's most desperate moment. And just look at how fast things were falling apart. The war with the Mughals had already been dragging on for more than 10 years. Then bam, 1700, her husband, the king, dies. And at that exact terrible moment, Emperor Aurangzeb himself is marching through the Deccan, just methodically picking off the most important Maratha forts one by one. The situation was beyond dire. And that was the question on everybody's mind, right? The leadership was gone, the treasury was broke, and their heartland was being overrun. I mean, from any outside perspective, it really looked like the Maratha story was about to come to a very abrupt end. But it didn't end, because in this moment of total, absolute crisis, Tarabai didn't just step up. She completely changed the game. She didn't just accept the role, she seized it and forged a brand new kind of resistance. And her first moves were incredibly smart and fast. Right away, she puts her infant son on the throne that secures the line of succession. Then, at just 25 years old, she takes the reins herself as regent queen. And this wasn't some symbolic thing. She became the supreme commander of the entire Maratha war effort. Now, this right here is the crucial point. She knew the old strategy was a losing one. Just hiding in forts, waiting for the massive Mughal army to show up, that was just a slow death. So her solution was a complete strategic revolution. Stop defending, she said, and start attacking. She decided to take the war right into the Mughals' backyard. And her new strategy? It was genius. She unleashed these lightning-fast cavalry units to raid deep into Mughal lands, which forced Aurangzeb to spread his forces thin. She gave her commanders the freedom to act on their own, and she even got into psychological warfare, bribing enemy officers. But she wasn't some armchair general. She was out there, personally riding to the forts to inspire her troops, leading from the front. For 7 straight years, she fought Aurangzeb to a complete standstill. But just as that external threat, that huge threat, started to fade, a new one popped up. And this time, it came from inside her own family, threatening to tear down everything she'd fought so hard to build. So in 1707, Aurangzeb dies. Now, this should have been a moment of pure triumph for the Marathas, right? But the Mughals made a very, very clever political move. They released Shahu, Tarabai's nephew, who'd been their prisoner for years. As the son of the previous king, he had a really strong claim to the throne. And just like that, you have a massive succession crisis. This family rivalry quickly exploded into a full-blown civil war. And at the decisive Battle of Khed, Tarabai's army was defeated. It was a huge setback, one that would literally split the empire she had worked so hard to save. But even in defeat, Tarabai showed how resilient she was. The Maratha state was now divided. Shahu ruled from Satara, but Tarabai, she refused to just fade into history. She retreated south and established a whole new rival kingdom at Kolhapur, and she continued to rule and be a major power player for decades. So, when we look back at her legacy, it's not really just about winning battles. It's about something so much more fundamental. She was the architect of the Maratha Empire's very survival. What's so important here is how historians see her. She's the one credited with keeping the dream of Swaraja, or self-rule, alive when it was closest to being totally wiped out. The famous historian Jadunat Sarkar called her the supreme guiding force that saved the nation. And then, in this final kind of ironic twist of fate, her own grandson ended up being adopted by her rival Shahu, which finally united the two family lines that the Civil War had split apart. So if you remember one thing from all this, make it this. Tarabai Bownesley did way more than just fight a war. She took a desperate, defensive struggle and transformed it into a strategy for long-term political survival. She's the reason the Maratha Empire didn't just endure, but went on to dominate the subcontinent. It really just leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? Tarabai faced the death of her husband, the invasion of her homeland, a civil war against her own family. I mean, she lost major battles, but she never, ever lost the war for her people's existence. It makes you wonder, how much of history is shaped not by the people with the most power, but by those few leaders who simply and stubbornly refuse to accept defeat? In the history of resistance against colonial rule, some names just stand out, and one of the most powerful is Rani Lakshmi Bai. Today, we're diving into the incredible story of this queen who became a warrior and how her very personal fight for her kingdom lit a fire across an entire nation. Now, get this. This quote, it's not from one of her allies. It's from Sir Hugh Rose, the British general whose actual job was to defeat her. When the man sent to take you down calls you the most dangerous, you just know there's an amazing story there. So how did a queen get a reputation like that? Well, to really understand the warrior, you have to meet the young woman she was first. She was born Manikarnika, and trust me, her journey to becoming the Rani of Jhansi was anything but ordinary for a woman in the 19th century. Yeah, so forget traditional lessons. Manikarnika grew up in a court buzzing with politics and military talk. And her education, it was totally unconventional. She became an expert at horse riding, archery, and sword fighting, skills that, nobody knew would one day be absolutely essential to defending her kingdom. Now, the spark that lit this whole fire, it wasn't a sword, it wasn't a battle, it was a piece of paper. A really controversial British policy called the Doctrine of Lapse was about to threaten not just her family, but the very existence of Jhansi itself. And it all starts with a heartbreaking personal tragedy. The Rani's infant son passes away, so she and the Raja adopt a boy, Damodar Rao. But then, the Raja himself dies in 1853, and the British East India Company immediately sees an opening. They just flat out refuse to recognize the adopted son's right to the throne, and just like that, you have a crisis. And this is where that piece of paper comes in. The Doctrine of Lapse was a key tool for British expansion. The policy was brutal in its simplicity. If a ruler died without a direct biological heir, the British could just annex their state. For Jhansi, this wasn't just some abstract political rule. It was basically a death sentence for their independence. So there she is. Her kingdom is about to be swallowed up, and her son is being disinherited. Rani Lakshmi Bai has a choice to make. Does she accept British rule, or does she fight? Well, her decision is one that would echo through the ages. मैं अपनी झांसी नहीं दूंगी. I will not give up my Jhansi. With those words, everything changed. She went from being a queen pleading for her rights to a rebel leader preparing for war. This became the rallying cry, a declaration of resistance that her people would never forget. And with that, there was no turning back. The fight moved from the court to the battlefield. And this is where the Rani's unusual childhood was put to the ultimate test, showing the world she wasn't just a ruler, but a brilliant military commander. All right, so let's set the stage. Who are the main players in this showdown? You've got the formidable Sir Hugh Rose leading the British. On the rebel side, the Rani is joined by the genius strategist Tatya Tope. At the very center of it all is her son, Damodar Rao. And defending the walls of Jhansi, you have legends like her master gunner, Ghulam Ghaus Khan. When the siege of Jhansi began, the Rani wasn't hiding in some back room. No, she was leading from the front, right there on the city walls directing the defense. And in a move that completely shattered the norms of the 19th century, she even created an all-female unit, the Durga Dal, to fight right alongside the men. For 2 solid weeks, she held that fort against a much bigger, much better equipped British army. But when the walls were finally breached, she pulled off one of the most incredible escapes you'll ever hear about. Under the cover of night, with her young son strapped to her back, she got on her horse and literally leaped over the fort walls, breaking right through the enemy line. But that amazing escape, that wasn't the end. Not even close. In fact, it was the start of a whole new chapter, one that would cement her place in history as this immortal symbol of resistance. She didn't just ride off and hide. Nope. She rode to meet up with other rebel leaders, like her ally Tatya Tope. And what do? They launch a surprise attack and capture the huge, strategic fortress of Gwalior. She was making it crystal clear that she was still a major threat to the British. But the battle for Gwalior would be her last. In June of 1858, dressed in a soldier's uniform and fighting on the front lines, Rani Lakshmibai was killed in action. She died exactly how she lived, a warrior fighting for her cause until the very end. Her death, though, kicks off a huge debate that historians still have today. What was she really fighting for? Was it just about protecting her own personal kingdom, a dynastic dispute? Or was she part of this bigger, emerging idea of a free, united India? People have definitely seen her through different lenses. On one hand, you have the British accounts from the time. Even guys like Hugh Rose had to admit she was unbelievably brave and skilled. But for Indian nationalist historians, she's so much more. She's a founding symbol of the freedom struggle, one of the very first icons of national resistance. But here's the bottom line. You can debate her initial motivations all day, but her impact is undeniable. Rani Lakshmibai took a personal dynastic fight and turned it into this powerful, lasting symbol of defiance against an entire empire. Her story is just this incredible testament to what one person's courage can do. It leaves you with this big question, right? How does the defiance of one person, one queen who refused to surrender her home, become the inspiration for a whole nation's fight for freedom? Some called her a queen, others a rebel. The British, they called her a terrorist. But who was Rani Gaidanlu really? Well, her story is about a teenager, believe it or not, who took on the entire British Empire to save the very soul of her people. I mean, think about it. How does a 16-year-old girl from the remote hills of Northeast India become a serious threat to the British Empire? It sounds almost unbelievable, right? To get to the bottom of it, we really have to dive into the world she grew up in. And this title, Daughter of the Hills, wow. It was given to her by India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, and it perfectly captures who she was. It gets right to the heart of her connection to her people, her land, and the culture she was ready to die for. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. To really get a handle on the rebel she became, you first have to understand the world she was born into. And it was a world caught right at this crossroads, between ancient tradition and the overwhelming force of colonial rule. So picture this. We're in the hills of Northeast India. This is the home of the Zaliangrong Naga tribe. For generations, their lives were their own, guided by their own traditions. But now, they're facing this immense pressure from the British Empire. We're talking about crushing taxes, forced labor, a real threat to their entire way of life. This was the perfect storm for a rebellion. And right at the center of this growing resistance, a new movement pops up. It's called the Haraka movement. It's both spiritual and political. And it was started by her cousin, Haifu Jadanong. Gaidanlu, well, she was totally drawn to it. She joins when she's just 13 years old, and this becomes the defining purpose of her entire life. Now, this part is absolutely crucial to understanding what drove her. You see, the Haraka movement wasn't just about politics. It was a fight on two fronts. On one hand, you had this cultural revival, this push to save their indigenous religion from Christian missionaries. And on the other, you had the political resistance, kicking the British out and setting up their own self-rule, a Naga Raj. For Gaitanluyu, you couldn't separate the two. They were two sides of the same coin. But then, everything changes. A single tragic event is about to happen, and it's going to thrust this young girl from being just a follower into a full-blown leader. She's about to become the face of an entire uprising. So in 1931, the British execute her cousin and mentor, Jadanong. They probably thought, okay, that's it, movement's over. But what they actually did was create a martyr. And just like that, the responsibility, the entire weight of the movement falls right onto Gaidanlu's shoulders. The whole thing just explodes from there. Within a year, the British are launching this massive manhunt just to find her. 16. Just let that number sink in for a second. She was only 16 years old when she took command of an armed uprising. And not just any uprising, an uprising against the most powerful empire on the planet. It's just mind-boggling. And this wasn't some conventional army she was leading. Nope. This was a people's resistance, through and through. She used the dense jungles of her homeland like a fortress. She got her followers to stop paying taxes, and she led these guerrilla-style attacks that just completely baffled the British Assam Rifles, who were, supposed to be the super well-equipped professional force. But of course, this kind of incredible courage, it always comes at a price. And for her, it was a huge personal cost. The empire was not going to let this challenge slide. They were going to strike back, and hard. Her fight for freedom was about to lead her straight into a prison cell. Even with her brilliant strategies, the sheer might of the British Empire was just relentless. After months of being on the run, someone betrayed her location. And in October 1932, she was captured. The sentence? Life in prison. 14 years. That's how long she spent as a prisoner, her entire youth. Think about it, from age 17 all the way to 31. Just gone. Spent locked away in one colonial jail after another. But here's the thing. You can lock up a person, but you can't lock up their story. As they moved her from jail to jail, her spirit never broke. She became this powerful symbol of resistance. And it was during this time, in a jail in Shillong in 1937, that Jawaharlal Nehru was visiting. He heard her story and was so moved by her spirit that he gave her the title Rani, which means queen. So fast forward to 1947. India finally gets its independence, and Rani Gaidanlu is released from prison. You'd think this would be the happy ending, right? But nope, this wasn't the end of her story. In a lot of ways, her freedom was the start of a whole new and even more complicated struggle. So check this out. After spending her youth fighting the British for a free India, she suddenly finds herself fighting for her vision inside a free India. Her new opponents were the Naga National Council, the NNC, and they had totally different ideas. She wanted a culturally unique Naga identity, but as part of the Indian Union. The NNC, they wanted to break away from India completely. And she was absolutely committed to her vision. She started facing threats from these secessionist groups, and she had to do something unthinkable. She went underground again. Can you believe it? For 6 years, the woman who fought the British was now hiding from some of her own people, all to stop a civil war. She only came out of hiding in 1966, when it looked like there was a real chance for peace. So when you look at her entire life, a lifetime of struggle against two completely different adversaries, what's the big takeaway? What is the lasting legacy of Rani Gaitanlu? All right, so let's do a quick recap of the key facts. We're talking about a woman from the Zeliangrong Naga tribe, a leader of the Haraka movement, an absolute icon of anti-colonial resistance, who earned the names Rani and Daughter of the Hills, and who was eventually honored by the Indian government with the Padma Bhushan Award. When you get right down to it, her story just completely changes how we should see the Indian independence movement. It proves the fight for freedom wasn't just happening on the mainland. No, it was burning brightly in every single corner of the country. She is such an important symbol of tribal resistance, of powerful female leadership, and of this idea that you can fiercely love your own culture and also be a part of a larger nation. In the end, Rani Gaidanlu's story is this powerful reminder that what we read in history books, it's almost never the full picture. Her voice was nearly lost, silenced first by an empire and then by conflicts within her own community. And it leaves you with this one kind of haunting question. How many other heroes just like her are still out there, hidden in the hills, their stories of courage just waiting for someone to tell them?